now recording.
Hello and welcome to the Temple Mount podcast. My name is Shogun, and joining me today is my new friend. Usually I say my good friend or my old friend, but today is my new friend, Drogoon, who we had the good fortune of meeting through our mutual friend and beloved member Hubert, or Hugh. And he is, among other things, a Tibetan Buddhist and perhaps a Tibetan Buddhist Lama. And so we have a lot to talk about. And just as a quick mention of like kind of the synchronicity of this, apparently he and I have both received the Wangkur of Senge Lenma, who is the medicine Buddha. So this is like kind of very strange, like synchronicity, unlikely kind of thing. But without further ado, thank you for joining me, Drogoon. How are you, sir?
Very well. Ever excellent, in fact.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that you found your way to this community. I'm glad that we've met, and I'm glad that we're doing this podcast. This may seem like a rather cliche or stereotypical opening question, but when did you begin to become interested in Tibetan Buddhism, especially given that, if I understand correctly, you were born in a Jewish family? So, at what point did you become interested uh, in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism specifically?
It's an excellent question, and the answer is both complicated and very simple. For the first 19 years of my life, I was a scientific materialist. I literally said out loud in one of my rooms in my father's apartment one day, "Science is the only answer, and all spiritual tradition, all people with spiritual traditions are deluded." This is actually what came out of my mouth at that time. Well, the reason I thought that is because I grew up, yes, in a Jewish household of a type, in a Reform Jewish household, which, if you know any Jews ethnically, is code word these days, half the time at least, if not most of the time, for non practicing secular Jew, because we don't want the rules and all the dogma. Well, the reason I didn't want those rules and that dogma is because my father didn't want them, and he was basically forced, in his opinion, to be a conservative Jew because that's the household that he came from with his parents. He was so resistant to it, in fact, that he skipped out on Hebrew school multiple times to the point where eventually it came down to, I think, the week before his bar mitzvah, and he had not learned his Haftorah portion at all. And so then he had to do a crash course, and his parents gave him a lot of shit, and he was even more resistant to it after he'd been bar mitzvahed, and he decided he would never force his children to do what he had been forced to do. And then my mother, on the other side of things, came from a Reform Jewish household, supposedly, but we've done the research now, and it's actually an Orthodox Jewish household that then decided to become Reformed. Either way, her generation was maybe 1 year removed from the bat mitzvah movement. So she was not allowed to be confirmed as a woman in the spiritual tradition because it didn't exist yet, that right. Well, so from that lack of basis in spirituality, I became a scientific materialist. And I thought that science was the only thing that was valid, and that was only things that could be proven with measurement and hypothesis were provable, and therefore those were the only things that truly existed. And so after that, I realized when I got to junior college around that same time, age of 19, maybe 20, I got to junior college and I had some friends. These two best friends of mine that took me under their wing started to introduce me to basic Buddhist concepts. And they were so basic that they said the reason why you understand these things to be true is because we're not actually teaching you anything at all. These are things you already know from past lives.
Very interesting. Okay. So you are now part of a specific lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. So it's obviously pretty complicated, but can you walk us a bit through like how you become aligned with one lineage and what lineage are you in and how is that derived and so forth? Like, because obviously you have a
Well,
specific kind of lineage,
yeah,
just like in martial arts or whatever, but it's a little bit
right.
different.
Right. I was actually speaking about the lineage of Reiki with you earlier today, and it comes into play here. Um, I'm actually a I wouldn't say card carrying member. I would say a practitioner who practices within the institutional lineages of both Tibetan Buddhism and Chan, which is Chinese precursor to Zen. This actually is not anything different than what happened in Tibet itself, because there were Chinese teachers and there were Indian teachers that helped cement Buddhism as a culture into the Tibetan psyche. So I'm a member of several institutional lineages that are aligned with monasteries, having, of course, been a monastic in past lives, I'm sure. I've had the bent to try to become a monastic several times in this life, and it's never come to fruition because I believe it's not supposed to come to fruition in this life at all. After all, even though I've been tempted to give up the householder life, I do have a child with my ex-wife, and I do have a girlfriend in Bhutan currently, who I'm going to be seeing probably within short order if all things goes to plan. But I do have my main sitting and walking meditation uh, is informed by the Chan tradition through my teacher Gogu Laoshi. Gogu Laoshi is actually the former monastic attendant, now a lay teacher in the Dharma Drum mountain tradition of Master Sheng Yen. He was the direct monastic attendant of Master Sheng Yen. At the same time that he was caucusing with the Dalai Lama on stage, and there are, I think, VHS tapes still available on Amazon of this. He was there taking photographs of his guru, while the Dalai Lama was there on stage. They were discussing the Buddha of wisdom, awareness, and discernment, Manjushri. So this is where my main sitting practice and body scan to verify where I have pain in the body comes from, and also walking meditation when I pace because of my supposed mania and bipolar disorder. Right. This is how it's framed in the pharmacological medicine tradition that
Right.
we have in the West.
Well, and I guess
My Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue.
No problem. Whereas my devotional practices and my higher practices that I've gone through, and I wouldn't say, honestly, I shouldn't say higher or lower, right? They're just different methods, different skillful means, upaya in the Sanskrit. Um, these are all different skillful means to get into different states of meditation and some, which we call samadhi, meditative absorption, in the Buddhist tradition. Each lineage has the institutional lineages. I should say this while I'm on the topic. Institutional lineages for me are not so important anymore. I have great respect for the monastic order. It's very much been of benefit to me in the past and throughout my life, this life. But I think these are we've I think maybe as Tibetan Buddhists specifically, we may have gone a little bit too far in identifying with a monastery and not with the practices themselves necessarily. I think the practice lineages are much more important. And in that way, I have many different practices, but the main two that I practice come to me through these various monastic institutions. But again, it matters what Buddha or Bodhisattva, spiritual warrior, is another gloss of Bodhisattva, one whose mind is set towards awakening or leaning towards awakening. Bodhi being awakening, Sattva, Satva. I spell it differently than most people because I read a paper one day, and I keep coming back to it, where the difference between Sattva with two T's and then a VA and Sattva with one T and a VA is the difference between just being and warrior or hero. So I think these are heroes or warriors for Bodhi, warriors for awakening, spiritual warriors. So then the path of the spiritual warrior is the path that leads you to become a Buddha.
So you've mentioned to me, and you have become a lama, and that you've become a lama because another lama said that you are a lama. Is that correct? That's how that happens. Like he says you're a lama, and at that point you
That's
become one
correct.
as well.
That is correct. There's a Bhutanese reincarnate Lama and I'll mention his name, and you can find him, and I can introduce anyone on the server to him personally if you would like. I'm actually looking for a few people. Maybe it's the people here in the VC right now in the podcast with me. Um, that we were looking for a few spiritual seekers that were sincere in their interest. This is Karchen Tulku Rinpoche. I can spell it and type it if anyone would like later on. He and I got into contact because of a group on Facebook where we were accumulating the 7-line prayer to Guru Rinpoche or Guru Padmasambhava, the lotus-born guru, who is the regent of the historical Buddha that brings Tibetan Buddhism to Tibet and makes it Tibetan Buddhism. He was a tantric master who was not only a monk, he had been a monk, and then he decided to leave those vows at some point, I believe, if I'm getting this story correct. And he had several spiritual consorts or sexual partners throughout his life and throughout the Himalayan plateau and the surrounding areas, the Tibetan cultural sphere. He was born in Swat Valley, Pakistan, as far as I can tell, which was then called Udayana, a very tantric Buddhist kingdom at the time, um, prior to what it is now. And then he was a nomad in his practice, and he wandered as a yogi through India, Nepal, Sikkim, and Tibet, and then eventually I think Bhutan was where he landed before he in effect ascended to his pure realm, which is called the Copper-Colored Mountain, Zandokpori. So Guru Rinpoche, um, he brought Tibetan Buddhism to Tibet in the Tantric Indian sense. The Chan masters of the time brought the sudden enlightenment practices, and Guru Rinpoche was hired in a way because the Tibetan Buddhists were trying to, they already had a form of Buddhism at the time, and they were trying to build the mother monastery of all mother monasteries, the first monastery ever in Tibet. And the story goes that actually what happened was they were building it during the day, and then the ogresses and the demons would unbuild the temple at night. And so they knew they needed a tantric master who was greatly powerful, and they hired Guru Rinpoche Padmasambhava to come to get rid of the demons. And instead of getting rid of the demons, he roped them into service and made them into guardian angels once again.
Fascinating. So many levels of, synchronicity and just, I mean, the fact that you've come here. I've told you about how, in my experience, and I think a lot of the people who've been in the server or the previous roundtable for a long time, like we've experienced, there seems to be sort of like a spiritual magnetism, a strange force of attraction that draws a particular kind of people to this server and maintains them here so that it is the place that it is. And this is one of the more obvious cases of that I've seen. The fact that you, through Hugh, I mean, all of us have known Hugh for years, would somehow be here and now doing this podcast. It just has to be commented on that it's interesting. There's some kind of dharmic thing going on there, in my opinion, or karmic thing. Also, I can tell already by talking to you that we have more to talk about than we could possibly cover in 90 minutes or 2 hours, or as some people have suggested, 30 minutes should be the limit. And I think we would have a lot more to talk about than we can cover in one episode. So I know you said you wanted to perhaps make a podcast. I would just suggest we could do a series or an ongoing, Buddhist discussion series. Might be something to at least consider.
Very,
Um,
very possible. And honestly, I would not be here without Hugh and without knowing Hugh for who he is for me. Hugh and I have talked about who we are in past lives and where we are to each other in this life. Um, and I've helped him figure out some things. He's helped me figure out some things. I think it's gotten to the point where basically what's going on is we're just, like I said, with my friends introducing me to Tibetan Buddhism through what they said to me while I was a scientific materialist at the time. I'm not teaching him anything that he doesn't already know already. And same for me from him. So the pattern has repeated, but now I am in a position where I can help deliver what knowledge that I've learned and what little As far as I'm concerned, I'm still a poor parrot for my masters. For them, yeah, I may be a master as far as some people are concerned, but then they would be grandmasters, you know?
Right, and I think we all have our roles and our stages and our times, but what I'm saying I think is quite interesting is that, it has to be observed, or at least I'm observing that from none of us knowing you, already you've got 16 people in this live chat listening to you.
Yeah.
More people that have talked to you before that, and when this episode is uploaded, hundreds of people will hear what you have to say. And if we can do a repeated series, then you can spread the Dharma, which again, I share with you that I'm part of a Tibetan Buddhist lineage. I also had a Lama, etc. Not nearly to the same extent as you, obviously. And like I said, for me personally, I'm taking out of your appearance in this server a little bit of a personal message that I need to reconnect with that because I literally was a Tibetan Buddhist as well for a significant portion of time. And I think that is kind of how Dharma works, isn't it? Like, isn't the idea of Dharma kind of like intentional karma or like teleological destiny? In other words, like the Dharma has like a way, like it accomplishes its purposes by guiding us towards awakening, essentially. Would you agree with
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think it goes, I wouldn't necessarily say deeper than that, but it goes, it's quite something. I don't know how to put it into words in the moment, but we beat the Dharma drum, and all the beings that can hear it come to the Dharma. So this
Right.
is my Dharma drum. It's been blessed by a Buddha Shakyamuni relic, the historical Buddha's relic, which got to meet my friend of over a decade, Amanda Kailash, when she was there blessing people with the relic. She blessed me. She blessed the drum. I think she blessed my cat even. I think we brought the cats. I remember I brought both of them. I'm not sure exactly, but this was back in November, mid-November 2013, after I'd already been to India and Nepal once in 2010. So that was a very miraculous thing. It came to Miami, Florida, and I was living in Fort Lauderdale area, Sunrise Plantation, uh, and I knew I had to go. And when I went there, the event had been sponsored by someone who was practicing in my lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, under my teacher Gotchen Rinpoche. And I knew this because they had a scroll painting in the background, a tanka in Tibetan, of our protectress from our lineage, specifically Achichuki Droma. Achichuki Droma was the great great grandmother of the founder of our Drikung Kagyu monastic lineage, Jigten Sumgon or Jigten Gompo. The protector of the world is a translation of his name, or the protector of the three realms. So this image called to me, as it were, and made sure that I was there and made sure that I knew that I was in the right place at the right time. This was the Maitreya Heart Shrine Relic Tour, which since has disbanded, unfortunately, due to, I believe it was lack of funds or sponsorship or something ridiculous. But anyway, I was fortunate enough to be there at the time. They had the censer or the incense um, holder and spreader. I don't know how to say censer other than in the Catholic tradition, unfortunately. His This was his from the 16th Karmapa, the previous Karmapa to the one we have now. The Karmapas are a lineage of over 900 years of reincarnation. They predate the Dalai Lamas by a few hundred years, even. So 16th Karmapa, Rangjung Rinpoche Dorje's incense spreader or holder, a censer, as I said before, was there. Relics from back in Shakyamuni Buddha's time, all the way through his direct disciples, the original sangha, the original spiritual community of monks and nuns, historical masters from the last few hundred years, lots of statuary, scroll imagery, just the whole. It was this one room, and it was almost as if the second temple or the third temple was there manifested in front of me, which is very apropos, seeing as I'm in Temple Mount server right now. And I just had this palpable sense of holiness and sacredness in that place. And it's a memory that I think back to fondly often, and I still have pictures. I'll post in the server at some point later some of the snapshots that I got of these holy objects arranged in front of me. I've mentioned when before we started, I have my spiritual supports. I have my instrumentation. You saw the drum. I have my thigh bone trumpet, which is actually not made of thigh bone in this case. It's acacia wood or sengdang wood in the Tibetan, with some metal for the for the mouthpiece. And then I have my vajra and bell, my spiritual scepter, and the holy bell that is imbued with and brings forth the fact that sound originates from emptiness, and emptiness is it manifests as sound. So when you ring the bell, there is no when you start to before you ring the bell, there is not necessarily any sound, but then immediately upon contact and experience, the sound comes forth out of emptiness and spreads out, just like the universe was spread into being from the primordial sound. Also in front of me, I have my prayer wheel, which is a globe, actually, as you can tell. It has the Liberation Upon Sight mantra, so everyone is blessed just from having seen this. Whoever sees this video, this plants the seeds of liberation for future lifetimes. Even if you don't realize it this lifetime, the seed is already planted in your mind stream. It is carved from wood from Israel, from my friends out there who are also students of Garchen Rinpoche and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And inside of it are millions upon millions of mantras from the Buddhist tradition in microfilm, some of which I actually sponsored so they could put it in my prayer wheel and then offer it to others afterwards. In addition to that, it has Aramaic prayers, which were put down onto some form of paper, I believe, in the Mount of Olives, where Christ Jesus taught, and it's in Aramaic because that's the language that Christ actually spoke. There's a form of Hebrew called Aramaic. In addition to that, it's Muslim prayers, Jewish prayers, Hopi Nation prayers from here in the West in the North American continent. Just a World Peace Prayer by Garchen Rinpoche himself, which again is my teacher, who I'll put on the screen here. He actually designed this, and then my friends who are Israelis carve it. My one friend carves it, and his wife paints the prayer wheel. In addition to that, I have a stupa or a relic monument, which you can tell from the back of it. I believe I have that on camera. Has relics inside of it. It's White Tara, she who helps us realize not only perfection from fear, but also helps increase your um, wisdom, merit, and long life. So that's the stupa in front of me. I have my actual skull cup, which is real human skull, not to freak anyone out, but makes the
Yeah,
same sound as my own. It has some holy objects inside, which supposedly is said that you're not supposed to have a skull cup on your shrine empty. I think this is actually not so important because you can offer emptiness itself. But that's my own personal interpretation. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. I do, out of respect to my Jewish heritage, have a kippa or a yarmulke skull cap on the skull cup, just like it would be on my own head. And actually, I will wear it now because I still have learned much from my Jewish heritage and going back and reinvestigating my Jewishness after becoming a Buddhist. When I got to not junior, I was in junior college when I was first introduced, and then I got to university, and then I reinvestigated my Judaism, and I caucused with the Chabadniks, the Chabad Jewish tradition, which is Orthodox. I have friends who are rabbis to this day. And then last but not least, because we're talking about enriching and magnetizing beings to the server and things like this, we have Zambala, who is the Buddha of spiritual wealth. And he is actually missing a hand because he gave of it, and actually I don't know where it went. It was consecrated as a statue, so it was supposed to be Buddha Zambala in actuality once it was filled with mantras and relics itself and sealed. And then the hand disappeared. And then years later, I got a statue of a hobo clown that took the place of Guru Rinpoche on my shrine once my Guru Rinpoche statue was stolen from me amongst very precarious circumstances in my life at the time. And then the hobo statue left my life, but it left me a hand, and it's exactly the hand that he's missing. And that is down in my place in Florida, which I need to reunite the hand to Zambala. But long and the short of it, that's my spiritual supports in front of me, in front of the computer as I speak to you right now. Um, this day, earlier today, I actually got on credit, which is to their credit for trusting me so much after having met the Geshe or the PhD monastic at the local Tibetan temple. They let me take away and pay them later this skull prayer beads or mala, mantra garland that was given to me today. So
So
talk about
that was given to you today when you went with Hugh to the to
correct,
Tibetan monastery today. So that's very
correct.
interesting, right? And then, like you said,
Yes,
it's 108 beads, like a traditional Buddhist mala, 108
yes.
beads.
It is definitely a mala. It is I would imagine that it's probably yak bone, which they usually are if it's a Tibetan mala, if it's made out of bone. And they are, I chose this one because the skulls actually look pretty accurate to an actual human skull, whereas sometimes they are cylindrical and just carved a little bit differently. I actually had a pair like this many years ago, maybe almost a decade ago, and amidst other precarious situations, that was stolen from me. At the time, I never replaced it until today.
I see. I mean, this is all extremely interesting. There's many different angles that we could go into and get deeper into
Hmm.
it. I'm wondering, should we open it up for questions and comments from the audience now? Do you think, or
I
is there
think
more that you'd
maybe
like to get into first? Or
I really do want to talk about because we brought it up earlier and people seem to have an interest, and I think you also expressed an interest, or maybe someone that was speaking when you were absent, when you had to leave briefly. I wanted to talk about near-death experiences.
right, yeah, you mentioned that. That would be an
Yeah.
interesting thing to talk about. Absolutely.
So near-death experiences is actually my entry point to this tradition in a very interesting way. My first Buddhist text that I ever read was Sogya Rinpoche's Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. In that, he goes into hospice, near-death experiences, chaplaincy, these sorts of things. And I knew at that moment that I was reading about my life path, but I did not necessarily have the courage to embark upon it in full. But I learned quite a bit from this book, and I would highly suggest anybody that's interested in these types of topics to read it. Sogya Rinpoche wound up eventually being immersed in controversy and sexual scandal, and then he shortly afterwards passed away. I am not sure whether the allegations are true, and if they are, then I regret having any being harmed by a spiritual teacher, and I vow in front of you all, if I am a lama, like this Karchen Tugul Rinpoche says, then I will, at the cost of my life, never abuse a student. Will never happen under my watch. I will never let it happen under my watch. and I have made a vow to not engage in deeds of body, speech, and mind except for the benefit of all sentient beings. This was my firm belief and vow when I took hold of the mind set upon awakening very recently. In fact, just this past year, or maybe January. Um, so if that is the case, that is, these allegations, I don't know if they were ever proven or not. I didn't, at the time, I did not care particularly to figure out if he was guilty or innocent. There was talk that he was guilty, and I basically believed the people that were telling me that he was guilty. Um, I don't know at the end of the day whether he was or not. And actually, there have been clues that maybe he was not guilty because I spoke to one of his direct students and she revealed to me not only that he was dead, which I did not know, that he had died shortly after the allegations broke, within the year or two, but also that she never saw any type of abuse like this and she was with him for many years. That it was only people that came from outside that then did not get the attention that they wanted from the Lama and therefore decided to level these allegations against him after the fact. Um, I had no idea he had died. I had never heard this from anyone. And she told me as one of his direct students. And We say in the Buddhist tradition that when people stop saying the long life prayers for their Lama, their life force is decreased. So this actually points to me that he may have been innocent. I'm not sure. So at this point, I take the neutral stance and allow it to be whatever it was and don't posit one way or the other. But it's very interesting to me that after seeing him as a harm doer for so long and not knowing if I should have actually read that book in the first place, that now I've come back to a middle ground approach, which is very Buddhist, because Buddha Shakyamuni himself taught the middle way approach, not going into extremes of positive and negative, but remaining neutral. So very funny that it winds up working out that way in the end, in my mind at least. Not that the abuse, if it was true, was funny at all. Obviously not.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and that is always part of the ebb and flow of humanity, is that you have these people who are perhaps aspiring towards holiness or towards enlightenment, but also still human and still fallible, and then it creates this trauma in people because they look at these people as gurus, and in some cases they are gurus, but even gurus are still humans. So you come to this, I don't know anything about the case in question,
Yeah.
but
So
you know,
I think what it points to, honestly, is that even beings who are fucked up in their soul because they're not aligned with the divine entirely, that they can still give the true dharma and the true message, a pure dharma in a way.
well, right,
Because
because sorry.
no, it's fine. Because basically, what winds up happening is the truth is the truth. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how it's packaged to you. If it's the true message and it's enough of the true message that it's not so distorted that you don't actually get the truth from it anymore, then you'll still get what you need. Even if there's a poor translation of the Bible, you'll still get the actual message of the Bible. Even if there's a cult leader, in my case, when I was led into this, these friends of mine that I mentioned before, they introduced me to their guru, and their guru was a wannabe cult leader in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. He gave me an understanding of no self that my true teachers that have, with pure lineage and pure intention, have basically tried to assail and were not able to assail. My teacher, Gogu Laoshi, he is my professor at Florida State University, Dr. Jimmy Yu. That's his hat that he wears when he's a scholar. He went around the room one day in my Intro to Buddhism. I think it was Buddhist Traditions. I don't remember the course number. Anyway, it's like Intro to Buddhism 101, basically. He went around the room asking people to explain the concept of no self or anatma. And he goes all the way around the room and he gets to me in probably, I think, the middle of the room. And he says, "What's your understanding of yourself?" And I told him basically exactly what had happened to me, my understanding that was derived from his wannabe cult leader stealing my ID from my hand in the moment. And in that moment, I had a large amount of anxiety, of course, because my ID, who I am, I thought at the time. And he said, "What is that feeling that you experienced when I snatched it out of your hand? What is it about this flimsy piece of plastic that actually is you? Is it your name? No, you can change your name. That's not inherently you. Is it your picture? No, your form changes. You don't have the same body you used to. Is it your height, your weight, your license number? What is it about this that makes it you?" And the actual true message there is no part of it that is you. None of the things that you think make you you and inherently you actually don't change. They all change. You're always constantly in flux. There is no stable, permanent, unchanging self at all. So
That's
he gets
exactly
this answer.
the
He gets
doctrine
this
of.
answer from me, and he goes, "You are not wrong," and he moves on to the next person. And I was very happy with that answer.
So I've been considering everything you've said, and you've talked about a lot of different things. And like I said, I really do feel like we'll need to do like at least a series of conversations to even scratch
Yes, which I'm
the
totally open to.
surface of this. Yeah, that would be awesome. But what's coming to me as I'm listening to you, I'm trying to think of like how to put this all together. And what's coming to
Sure,
me, and you can tell me what you think about it, is
of course.
there's something inherent to consciousness. Somebody's mic is echoing or whatever, but there's something inherent to consciousness or something inherent to the soul or spirituality, which is teleologically, for anyone who doesn't know, meaning like purpose driven or direction driven, or has the purpose of awakening, right? Reaching enlightenment. So it's like we don't really know what's going on with like how the world works, but we know that there is consciousness, and we know that consciousness has a teleology. It has a direction, right? It's moving in a direction, and the direction it's trying to move is the direction of awakening, or what we would call enlightenment. And so Buddhism is just at some ancient point in the past, people recognize that. They said, oh, well, we're conscious beings, and our consciousness is teleologically driven to enlightenment, so we should like systematize, formalize, and maximize the efficiency of that process. And so what I'm taking, yeah, does that make sense to you of what Buddhism is? Because that's how I kind of understand it. It's like our souls naturally wish to awaken, and there is something in the very fabric of reality that allows them to do so. And that's all really Buddhism is what we call the Dharma then.
So Buddhism has become a religion because people decided to lionize, and for good reasons, obviously, Buddha Shakyamuni because of what he had discovered. It becomes a religious dogma that then has ethical discipline, and these things are worthwhile to a point. And then you realize that at some point there are rules for people that need to follow rules, and there are people with realization that goes beyond the rules, and they're the exception to the rule. Um, so this is actually an important point that is I'm very glad that you brought up, and I do agree with you wholeheartedly. I think you've used some key terms there that need to be unpacked for the Buddhists that are tuning in, because there is an incorrect, in my humble opinion, there's an incorrect concept of the soul in the Eastern tradition, which is that Westerners and particularly the Abrahamic faiths, that this idea of soul is unchanging and static and inherently existent and never changes. I don't think that that's actually the understanding in the Western tradition, having studied back into my Judaism and having become, a follower of Christ, and had the entry of the Holy Spirit into my consciousness or my soul. Um, this idea that the soul does not evolve is a bit ridiculous, in my opinion, honestly, because the Westerners that I've talked to, and the Abrahamic faiths in particular, don't believe in a static, unchanging soul. The soul evolves. The soul gets right with God. The soul becomes more in union with the divine source. So this is not actually something that is in conflict with the East and the West. And I think this has been made into an artificial conflict because of a misunderstanding. So I'm here to correct that, if nothing else. And and also to point out that yes, these the Vinaya, the vows given to the various types of beings, whether they be householders or monastic, or yogis that are beyond both, honestly, which I've held for the last this is going to be year 8 since a few days before the teachings in 2016, on May 12th, 2016, in private, an audience with Gardner Rinpoche, Ina Baylor Darje, his translator or his interpreter, and myself. Um, Not only did he give me these vows of a wandering yogi, which I'd already been wandering for a few years before that, actually. Um, he gave me these vows, and I should arguably be I'm wearing my meditation belt slash bag, which we'll have to do for now because I don't know where the other things are. But I have white robes symbolizing pure intention and these cotton clad yogi vows, which I've been holding since 2016. That was the day before my birthday. It was the best early birthday present I've ever given myself. And the best late birthday present I ever gave myself was continuing to follow him to Dayton, Ohio, and receive the supplementary teachings after he told me how to meditate as a yogi, and which vows I'd taken, um, and told me my secret tantric name when I take Wongur, like you've taken, Shogun. So this was a very good time of my life. It was a very amazing turning point for me. And I've been trying to, as best as I can, faithfully hold these vows since then. But
So,
yeah, teleologically, I think this is you made the most important point, actually, and I'm just here to clarify just a little bit.
well, so what I'm going to say is just my sincere. This is what I do. I speak from the sincerity of my soul. It's the only way I can really express it. One thing I've noticed is I have, in my own personal opinion, a keen judge of character, and occasionally I meet people where I recognize inherently that they're either more intelligent than me, or they're more wise than me, or they're more spiritual than me, or they're more advanced than I am along a spiritual path. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm getting that perception from you very strongly, right? Like, I understand the path you're on and that you're farther on it than I am. And so this might seem kind of weird even to say, but I would actually be grateful, on a personal level, if you would continue to communicate with me, as a Lama, which apparently you are, right? And I'm willing to accept you as one as well. Not that you need my acceptance of it, but what I'm saying is I actually feel it would be personally beneficial for me to continue to talk to you on an ongoing basis, because I can tell that I could accelerate my own spiritual growth by doing so. So I'm just putting that out, both to acknowledge that from what I understand about Tibetan Buddhism and spirituality and ethics and everything that you're saying, it all checks out to me. And also I can recognize, like, that you're farther along the path from my point of view, whatever that might mean to anybody. But you know,
Yeah, I
and
can
yeah.
say something about that. And I appreciate the respect, and I do take it humbly into consideration. And I definitely will keep in contact with both this server and with you personally, since you've expressed that sincere interest as a spiritual seeker. That's definitely something I'm interested in pursuing further. I will just say that we talk about, and this would probably be the last point before we open up to Q&A, which is fine. But I just feel called in this moment to mention this from my heart, from my soul, deep within my soul. That my understanding of the Buddhist tradition has evolved over time, obviously, as I've practiced. I studied for approximately 5 years, in the different scriptures of the Buddhist traditions, and also reinvestigated some of the other Abrahamic traditions. And then I practiced as a wandering yogi for the last 11. So it's been 16. It's maybe it was 6 years of study. I think it's 17 years this year. So 6 years of study and then 11 years of practice, because I felt I was lopsided in study, and needed to do more practice. I'd received so many Wangkur, it was ridiculous. I was making a list and counting my blessings, and the list got just entirely too long for me to even keep up with, honestly, which was, fantastic in one way, and also like, wow, am I ever gonna put any of this, my money where my mouth is, type of thing. So then I switched gears a little bit, while I was in India or Nepal. No, I was in Nepal. I was at the Tibetan monastery in Nepal, Trangutashi Yangtze Chuling. No, Trangutashi Yangtze Gompa. Um, which was Trungpa Rinpoche's monastery. Trungpa Rinpoche passed away just last year. A lot of my lamas are actually passing away from this body and have not necessarily reincarnated yet. And so I take it as a sign of, with complete humility, as a sign that I need to step in and be the Lama that Garchen Rinpoche back then in 2016 told me to be, because he told me then that yes, I could teach certain things that I was wanting to teach when people came to me and expressed sincere interest, but that actually it would be best to teach a particular text, which was the 37 practices that lead to spiritual warriorship. He told me to teach that directly, and that that was the way to teach beings how karma, cause, and effect is messing with them in this life and all future lives
Right.
until they transcend karma.
I
That was not actually what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say about the realization being different levels was in the Buddhist tradition, we talk about the bodhisattva bhumis or grounds or stages. You could say steps if you're maybe framing it, if you're familiar with AA or NA or any of these anonymous groups that talk about 12 steps. So there's sometimes 10 and sometimes 13, depending on whose translation and who you ask, depending on what lineage they are from. I think actually there are 13 in total, and the 10th is enlightenment, and that the 13th is awakening. Because again, the awakening is the translation of Bodhi literally. As a translator, I can speak on this in brief, and I'll only say that enlightenment and awakening are not the same thing. They're not the same term, and they're not the same level of realization. I think you can be a bodhisattva on the 10th bhumi and have enlightenment in your grasp, but then full awakening or samyak sambuddhahood is still slightly further along. So I would say that maybe I'm a 10th level bodhisattva at this point, but I have not fully manifested until I get to my tipping point with the day after Hugh, which is supposedly, according to my calculations, going to be the 24th. So that's 2 days from now. Hughes is supposed to be tomorrow, which is Milarepa Day, which is the person who initiated the vows of the cotton clad yogis in Tibetan history. And then his teacher, Mpo Lotsawa, the translator, the eyes of the world. Lotsawa is translated as the eyes of the world, someone who has gone and gotten the scripture themselves, looked at it directly, and then retranslated it for the benefit of sentient beings. This is a Lotsawa. So this is who I am in this life. I'm a translator and an interpreter. I've been doing this for over a decade now. I've actually got a translation of a particular prayer from our lineage from a Wonkur that I just received in the end of January from the head of our lineage, His
Okay.
Holiness Drikun Kabin Chatsang Rinpoche Shinle Lundrup. So
So
that's all I'll really say. I think we can open it to Q&A.
I would like to open it to Q&A, and I probably shouldn't insist on taking this last word, and I'm probably over repeating the point, but I just want to say, like, I've interviewed hundreds of people, I've done hundreds of interviews, and I just want to emphasize to anyone who's listening that I think it's like a moral imperative for me to make sure that you get more of your content out and that we produce more podcasts where you continue to speak, because it's obvious to me that you've only scratched the surface of this. And I am only speaking from someone who in the past was involved in Tibetan Buddhism and Dharma. And honestly, your expression of Dharma through what you communicated today brought something back to life in me that was completely dead prior to that and reminded me of like what Dharma is and what it felt like when I was part of that. And that's not any small thing to me. So when Hugh introduced me to you verbally and said, "Oh, you're a Lama and stuff," I was totally open to that, and obviously I have no authority to judge that, but I'm just willing to say that like I would legitimately say like you are someone I would be more than grateful to like learn from on an ongoing basis and see as a teacher, right? And furthermore to give a platform for and to have like a regular opportunity to continue to teach, because I think that you sharing the Dharma in this community could potentially be really positive for the community. So that's just my feeling, and everybody here knows like I don't say that often or ever before, but that was for me that was a profound talk that you just did, genuinely from my heart. That was profound.
Thank you.
yeah,
I appreciate it.
yeah, I would definitely say that if Shogun is saying that he respects you as a teacher, you're winning because that does not happen. And secondly, one thing I want to say is the way you were talking about how you were told that the specific thing you should be teaching is this like path of the enlightened warrior. I think that I would love to see an event in the future where you sit down with a group of us, lead us in a meditation, and teach us that thing, because I've never read that, but I think it's valuable to read that, and I would love to hear it out of your mouth.
So it's actually freely available. This text is online. If you go to garchen.net, GARCHEN.net, you go into their text library. They have the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva, or the 37 ways of the 37 things that Bodhisattvas do, maybe is the translation that is out now. It's a better translation. I think the title should stay 37 Bodhisattva practices, maybe, or 37 most 37 practices of most excellent conduct of a spiritual warrior would be maybe how I would translate it personally. I may do another translation myself at some point in the future, but Ina, who's a friend of mine personally, who I've known for many years, who is Gartran Rinpoche's personal translator, or his main translator, I should say. He's got others that supplement when she's out of town and things like this. That's freely available there. It's a yellow booklet. It can be downloaded in PDF. And actually, there is an app called 37 Practices, which you can find in the Google Play Store, and I believe it's in the App Store for iPhone as well, where it gives not only Garchen Rinpoche's personal commentary on the 37 Bodhisattva practices, which is what I'll be teaching from in particular, but also the Dalai Lama's commentary, which I'll also be teaching from. And there is another book, which the title of it escapes me at the moment, but I've had it in PDF before, and I'm happy to share, provided that whoever takes of it will eventually, at some point, give give some sort of donation to the publishers, so that the people that helped publish it and the translator and the Lama's reincarnation can be helped to continue their Buddha activity. That is Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. All these names I'll type out for those who are interested later on. But those three commentaries are going to be the basis for my own commentary. And actually, I'm going to be publishing a book about these 37 Bodhisattva practices, which frames our waking experience in the addiction model. Because having been an addict prior to this, both of drugs and alcohol, um, and my chips and my tags are in the other room, but not important so much. These I think it's the 13 steps of Buddhism is what I'm going to call it. So that people who are in NA and AA and these types of things know that they can be cured of their disease like anything. There is a medicine, and the medicine is spirituality itself. The 12th step in AA and NA, not to out myself or any other people, but it's fine if it's my own life that I'm talking about, right? In the 12th step, it says, having had a spiritual awakening, we then, basically deliver the spiritual message to others who are suffering. That's the 12th step. The 13th step is to realize that that 12th step is the antidote itself, and that is the cure. And then therefore you don't have to consider yourself an addict anymore, because you don't ever have to pick up a drug and to pick up a drink ever again.
May are we in Q&A now? May I
Yeah,
ask?
everything's
Yeah,
open now.
please.
Yes. Yes.
Whoever
Okay.
feels like asking a question,
Yeah,
please.
I would just like to say you've been in here for a couple days now, and we've had a couple conversations, and I would really like to pick your brain at some point, off the air or whatever. But I do have two questions for you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely
So,
not. Go ahead.
question number one. We'll start with one. What would you describe as the difference between enlightenment and awakening? Because uh like for me, I've always felt this like sort of calling towards the spiritual path, but it's also always been like this like thing of like I want to find the answer for myself, right? I want to do all the exploration, and I don't want to, not that I don't listen to you know people who are practiced and sort of educated in matters that I've not looked into, but just that like I feel like any soul can find it regardless of whether or not they have the proper teacher. So what would you first question is what would you just define as the difference between awakening and enlightenment?
So this is something that attracted me to speaking with Hugh in the first place, and one of the reasons why I'm here in his spot right now, being in person with him. I used to think that enlightenment and awakening were interchangeable, and that we were just using a British Enlightenment era term for what is actually translated as awakening in the direct Sanskrit or from the Prakrits from the Pali. Um, I used to think this was just a skillful means because everybody knows the term enlightenment, and very many people use, or at least less people, I would say, entirely absent from the cultural consciousness of the world. But that basically that enlightenment was a catch-all term that we could use for awakening, and that people thinking that they needed to attain enlightenment as if it was something that could be delivered from on high, from outside, was just a play that we could dance that jig and we could play that game if people wanted to frame it in such a way, but that it actually was awakening because you're awakening from the dream world. Neo, I am Morpheus as a guru. So Morpheus is not actually free of the cycle of suffering in the Matrix at all, is he? He's a student of the former Buddha, of the former Neo, before he reincarnated as Neo. He's not actually exempt from anything. He's not higher in realization at all. He's just reminding the Buddha of what he already knew as a
So
guru.
so my
So, well, let me, if you don't
yeah,
mind,
sorry. Yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
still, I'm still getting to your point. What I've come to understand in my the brief time that I've known Hugh, in the last, he says 3 weeks, it feels like months upon months, and it honestly feels like we've known each other forever, because I remember some of our past lives, having talked to him, at least in glimpses. You know, once I started speaking with him, and once he was speaking with me, it woke something in me that pointed out this difference, and we figured out only in the last few days, actually, that enlightenment and awakening were not exactly the same. Um, so enlightenment is when you get through your practice to the point of no self or non-self, where you entirely destroy or obliterate or kill the egoic self, the selfish self. And I think that that is what most people would call enlightenment, would be 10th bhumi, or 10th stage, or 10th step. Awakening, for those who are talking about 13, would be being a Samyak Sambuddha, fully realized and awakened Buddha, a fully awakened one. Um, this to me is what Hugh and I have done together, and what he actually did for me. This is what is delivered from on high, from the creators, and that this is the elevation of from no self to transcendent, or true self, or completely perfected self. Most beings in their egoic minds, in their egoic souls, they think that they are truly existent as they are now. And they believe that all these things that I deconstructed earlier in the talk, to be true and inherently existent. And to a degree, static and unchanging, right? But then with the Buddhist methods of disintegrating these things, we find out that we are just, what we call a self is just form, feeling, sensation, action, and consciousness, or soul. So these five are what we make into a hand. These 5 fingers are what we think of as the hand. But really, the divine source is the palm, underlying all of it. Without that, we would not have connection. And this would be what Hugh calls the oversoul, what I would call the completely perfected, or the Dzogchen, completion, great completion, self. The transcendent self that is beyond this egoic self, but actually has realized that that egoic self is actually kind of bullshit, honestly. And that awakening is the point where you are elevated by the creator, someone with higher realization than yourself. And they actually help deliver you to an understanding that you are not necessarily the creator, but you are the child of the creator, and that you have been made from illusion into reality. You go from Pinocchio the puppet to Pinocchio the real boy because of a Geppetto. That is the difference between enlightenment and awakening, as far as I understand it, from having had these last few months of realization dawning.
So my second question, and then I promise I'm done. Don't
No,
want to take
no
up too
problem.
much airtime. But do you think so you know how, like, if you go into the etymology of names, like every name has like a meaning. And so my question to you is, do you think names have something to do with karma or dharma? Like, is the name we're given, is that somehow spiritually influenced by like what our sort of, I guess would you say, destiny is? Like,
So this idea of destiny or predestination or fate is actually I'm not saying you said this, but I'm taking what you've said and making another point which needs to be made at this point, honestly. Um, that and of course I lose my train of thought in the moment and don't know what I was about to say. I'll see if I can get it back by talking about something related to what you were saying.
well, what I was asking was like, is does the meaning of our names have
Yes.
something to say about us
r-
spiritually?
Right. So it does, and I think this is an important point actually, and I may not have been going there before, but reminding me of your question actually brings this up, and maybe in its place, or maybe this is what I was intending to say in the first place. Um, when we take refuge as Buddhists in the three jewels, or the three refuges of the threefold refuge of Buddha, who is the great physician, the Dharma, which is the medicine or the antidote, and the Sangha, which is the spiritual community, basically the nurses who minister individually to different beings through contact and through being none other than someone who is suffering themselves. I think that when you take this refuge, you actually get a Buddhist name, and this is an important point because I haven't determined, and I think it actually is probably both, and at the same time, and not one or the other. There's not necessarily a dichotomy or a duality involved necessarily, unless you see that it is such, right? Unless your perception is of that is your reality. Um, I think when they give, at least in my case, I can speak from personal experience. When I've had all these different Buddhist names given to me, because I've taken refuge multiple times with different lamas because of the connection, and never had enough ego to say, "Don't give me a name. I already have a name. I'm this, not that." I always was taking a new name. I think that these names are pointing out the qualities that the Lama sees in you when they gave you the vows. I think these are the things that will fully manifest when you become an enlightened one, or you're on the Bodhisattva bhumis, and then you eventually become a fully awakened Buddha. Um, so these are both things that they see in you and also qualities you have to actualize, things that you need to put in the work to be able to say that you are. So in my case, I've been given many names, and you can string them all together and make a reincarnate Lama's title, and there can be argument both ways that I am or that I'm not, depending on who you ask. That I know who I think I am from past life regressions, glimpsed, and from talking to Hugh and from recognizing who Hugh has been to me in the past, in past lives, and we've come to an understanding very, very easily within a short period of time of who we are to each other. He speaks of me, and I think I can say this openly, and if I can't, I'm sure he'll say something about it later, uh, which will be fine either way. Um, he he has done this process of elevating from illusion to reality for me, and I'm the first person that he did this for. And so now he speaks of me as his advisor and his magistrate. someone who can tell him the truth and remind him of what the truth is, so that he needs not be afraid anymore of elevating others, and that I can elevate others too, because we've come to a point of realization where we realize that this emptiness that we talk about in the Buddhist tradition, this shunyata, this emptiness is called emptiness because the no self has to be realized and the ego death has to occur before you can ever be elevated to true self or completely perfected self. So this is an important point, and I think this is something that has to be taught to Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike. I think this is something that we haven't gone far enough in our spiritual evolution up until this point, because the creators were afraid of making us real because they did not know if we would usurp them or if we would become their heirs and their lineage holders.
Well, thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the questions. They're very good
Yeah,
questions.
I hope we can
Yeah.
chat more sometime.
I'm sure we'll have
Absolutely.
lots of opportunities, but we don't want to take too much of your time right now. So, does anyone else have a question or comment?
Yeah, quick question.
Sure.
What would you recommend for someone that's looking to get into Buddhism? What would be the first step they should take or study?
The first book, like I said before, for me was Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, for Sogel Rinpoche. That's a good entry point, specifically to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, especially in the appendices. At the end, he goes into very basic Buddhist teachings. They're threaded throughout, but then he goes into like the meanings of the mantras for a few of the mantras, which was very instrumental for me as a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. I would also say that there is also something that I should bring up here for the Buddhists among us. That I think we've gone in the Tibetan tradition and some of the other traditions, the Mahayana traditions. We've gone to a point where honestly we leave the scriptures of Shakyamuni Buddha's own words on the shrine and don't read them as much as we should. So I would say get a translation of the Dhammapada, the Buddha's actual words and his teachings throughout his life, and start there. And if you have an interest in Tibetan Buddhism, then you can take some of these books. There's so many books that I could rattle off. It could take a whole podcast and just rattling off references for books that I've found instrumental. There's another good one that I have to read in full. I haven't read it in full, but I started to read it in rehab before I got kicked out due to my own ego, amongst other things at the time. And that was called The Power of Love. I think it's Fran something. I don't remember her last name. Anyway, long story short, I was reading this in the rehab, and it was very, very amazing to read this. And that's when I decided to write, or start to write at least. I've lost the manuscript since because of COVID and circumstances beyond my control. I was starting to write a manuscript for my 13 Steps of Buddhism, which I wasn't calling it at the time, but I started to write the intro in the rehab because I started reading this book and because I was reading the 37 Bodhisattva practices. Which leads me to the last point that I'll answer your question with, which is that I would go to my own teacher's website because I am a poor parrot by comparison, in my opinion. And then you should get directly from him and directly from the scriptures themselves through his website, garchen.net, garchen.net. Go into their online library and look at the different texts and prayer texts and and books that they have there. Oh, and one other thing, Namo Buddha Publications, NAMO Buddha BUDDHA Publications. That's Trungpa Rinpoche's publishing arm for his monastery. They have electronic copies of some amazing books for as low as $1.50 to download as PDFs. Was highly suggest that you look through that. Basically, consider yourself, if you're an interested seeker and you're just starting on the path, or you're path curious, even not even starting yet. I would go and go to these different online libraries and just smorgasbord it. Just go into it as a buffet. Taste a little bit of whatever interests you and see what actually meshes with your soul.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions? I want to ask that one more time, and then I have one final question myself, and I think we could close it up.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So, are you familiar with the pointing out instructions in the Dzogchen tradition of Buddhism?
Yes.
Would you be able to walk us through perhaps the experiment of pointing at something away from us and then turning attention upon itself?
So I don't know if I'm qualified to give the Rigpe Salwang itself. I have not spoken with my own teacher, Garcher Rinpoche, about whether I'm qualified or not to give this. Prior to this, I was asking if I could give the refuge vows, and I was told no, I wasn't, which I think was actually code for no, not yet, but eventually, yes. So I don't know how much I can speak upon it directly. However, I will say that Garcher Rinpoche is giving pointing out instructions constantly through his teachings in various ways. It may not be packaged as the Rigpe Salwang, which is the one that you're referring to, but I think the greater point here is that if you point to the true nature of mind in whatever skillful means is necessary for that particular being's karma and their soul, I think the message gets through. So I would encourage you. I can probably talk upon it maybe in private, as long as your understanding is such that I'm not qualified just yet by being told that I'm qualified, but from experience that I can speak upon what I went through. But I think that probably should be done on a one-to-one basis or a smaller group. And I wouldn't necessarily put that on YouTube right away. If I'm given permission to do so, I'll be happy to do so. Not a problem. I would like for every being to have the pointing out instructions and the direct pointing. But I have a little bit of a lingering doubt because again, being 10th level Bodhisattva and not being a fully awakened Buddha, not at least until the 24th, and I'll get back into contact with Garcher and Pache at that point, once the tipping point for myself has occurred. I think at that point, so maybe in the next few days, maybe I'll be able to speak on this further. But at this point, I probably should let that be the last I speak of it for right now, if you don't mind.
Oh no, thank you very much for answering my question.
Absolutely. So I had a final question, which is, do you think it would be appropriate, and I don't know if it would be or not, to close by chanting some kind of mantra? And if so, would you like to end the
Yeah,
podcast by chanting a mantra? And if so, what mantra?
absolutely. Actually, I was thinking about doing this myself, and I was going to ask you if I had free reign to actually close it out that way. So I will actually if anyone wants to take this as a transmission and practice this prayer, I can actually I'll just give you two. I'll give the 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva, which is purification Buddha, Lord of the six families, the Lord that is the Lord of the five families of the Tantras. And this is in honor of my friends who have passed away recently in the last few years, including the one who I saw as Buddha Vajrasattva for me in person, um, who um, who passed away due to COVID complications, and then another friend of mine who passed away recently from heart attack from struggling to breathe. And then I'll also give the 7-line prayer of Guru Rinpoche, which again you can see as a transmission so that you can use it in your practice if you choose to. And that is the prayer to Guru Rinpoche, and then the shortened version of the mantra for him. So if anyone wants these transmissions, you can see that it's a transmission. If you'd like to take it as a blessing and not practice it, you can take it as a blessing, or you can just earnestly listen and just see it for empty speech, whichever you choose. That's up to you. That's your perception. As Garchen Rinpoche said to me at one point when I asked him to become my teacher, he said, "Whether or not I am your teacher and whether or not you are my student is up to you. I love all beings equally." So I'm at the point where I can honestly say unconditional love is in my soul. And in that spirit, I will give this transmission. And also, I'm setting the intention on recording that this recording can be taken as a transmission also. It doesn't have to be live. So it's not just the people who are here directly in the Discord VC at Temple Mount, which I'm very grateful to have been a part of this podcast for, and grateful to be a member of, and I will continue to be a member of, and continue to help whoever decides that they want to have me give them some suggestions spiritually. At the end of the day, take it with a grain of salt or a shot of penicillin. It doesn't matter if it does something for you, then and it's of benefit, then go ahead. But here are the transmissions, and I'll chant them 3 times very fast. actually I'll chant them twice very fast and then once slowly, just so you can understand what I've said in more detail. And of course, there are translations in English out there. I do the chanting in the Tibetan because that's how I learned it. So the 100-syllable Vajrasattva transmission is now. Om Benzasato Samaya Manupalaya Benzasato Tenapa Tishujuda Mebawa Sudokaya Mebawa Subokaya Mebawa Anurakta Mebawa Sarasidi Meprasa Savakarma Suzame Sitim Shirim Kuru Hom Ha Ha Ho Bhagavan Sarvatata Gata Benzrama Memus Benzriva Mahasamata Samaya Sato Om Benzasato Samaya Manupalaya Benzasato Tenapa Tishujuda Mebawa Sudokaya Mebawa Subokaya Mebawa Anurakta Mebawa Sarasidi Meprasa Sarvakarma Suzame Sitim Shirim Kuru Hom Ha Ha Ho Bhagavan Sarvatata Gata Benzrama Memus Benzriva Mahasamaya Sato so with more slower or just slower recitation, that is Om Benza Sato Samaya Manu Palaya Benza Satos Tenopa Tishta Drido Mebawa Suto Kayo Mebawa Anu Rato Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Meprayatsa Sarva Karma Tsutsame Sitam Shiryam Guru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tathagata Benzrama Me Munsa Benzri Bhava Mahasamaya Sato and that can also be said all in a shorter version, which is just Om Benza Sato Ah. Om Benza Sato Ah. Om Benza Sato Ah. This is the secret mantra, which is the complete 100 syllables without the 100 syllables, is the shortcut. And then the 7-line prayer to Guru Rinpoche is in transmission here. Gojin Eugene Brangsan, Pema Gesa Dombola, Yasin Chokin Nujumne, Pema Jone Shesudra, Kode Kanjama Pukor, Keki Jesu Dajuji, Jinji Love Shekso, Guru Pema Sidi Ho. Origin Eugene Brangsan, Pema Gesa Dombola, Yasin Chokin Nujumne, Pema Jone Shesudra, Kode Kanjama Pukor, Keki Jesu Dajuji, Jinji Love Shekso, Guru Pema Sidi Ho. So that one in slow down for people to understand it better is Hong Origin Yujin Nubjang Sam Pema Gesar Dompo La Yatsen Choki Ngudrub Ne Pema Jungne Shisu Drak Koru Kanjo Mangpu Kor Keki Jesu Dak Drubji Jinji Lapshir Sheksu So Guru Pema Siddhi Ho. And the mantra for Guru Rinpoche in more syllables, but actually is the 7-line prayer is also completed within this, as far as I understand it, is just Om Benza Guru Om sorry. Om Ahong Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hong. Om Ahong Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hong. Om Ahong Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Hong. So those are the mantras and the prayers of Vajrasattva and Guru Rinpoche. And then with that, I'd like to close it with a dedication of merit. We say in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that you seal it with refuge at the beginning, your actual practice in the middle, and then with the dedication at the end. And I've had a teacher, my retreat master, master of accomplishment, Drupal Tinli Ningpo Rinpoche, has said in the past, I believe it was him at least, that the reason why we forget and we reincarnate and we haven't solved our own problems and solved the cycle of suffering for ourselves and for others is because we forget to dedicate the merit and seal it like a drop being he didn't say this, but this is my understanding from a movie that I saw, which is very Buddhist, about a Tibetan monk who renounces his vows because he has a wet dream actually. It's this a drop in the ocean can never be exhausted because it becomes inseparable from the ocean. So this is like the dedication of merit. So with that, I'll dedicate the merit. Gewa di nyordu dak orjin pema dripkerne joa chikyang malupa de sala gupar sho. So in English, Mm, May I, through this practice, may I be led to the state of Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, and may I lead all beings to that same state, not one left behind. And then with that, I would also say Gyuche, 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 Tashishok, Samaya Gya Gya Gya, which is in English. Um, May it be just so, may it be just so, may it be just so, may all be auspicious, vowed, sealed, sealed, sealed. And then at the very end, I will say, may all beings have happiness, and the only answer for the only true cause of happiness, which is love. May they be liberated from suffering and the main source of suffering, which is self grasping. May all beings benefit. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Whoever's come live and whoever's seeing this on recording after the fact. Thank you, Shogun, for having this amazing platform on Discord, Temple Mount server on Discord. I would highly suggest anyone watching or hearing this that's not here presently live to come join. I've gained so many things in the short amount of time I've been here, and I appreciate you letting me have this as a platform to spread the Dharma. It's very excellent, and you've all gained a lot of merit in this server to have this even be possible. This is the basis from which a lot of good will be able to be done and enacted. My Buddha activity, as the incarnation of this life, sees it for what it is, and I appreciate you all for who you are, not just what you do.
Well, this is probably the first time I've ever said this unironically, but namaste, brother. Thank you so much for,
Namaste, namaste,
for
and
waking up, honestly, part of my soul that had died and reminding me of part of life that I forgot about. And that means a lot to me. And I look forward to future conversations. Thank you so much for what you shared. Thank you so much for everyone who listened and participated, asked questions. And make sure you find us on the Temple Mount Discord server, YouTube, and BitChute Roundtable Temple Mount podcasts. And hopefully, we'll do an ongoing series about the Dharma. But I think this is a great introduction. And I'm glad you found your way here. So thank you again, my friend.